Part 93. Cannon Fodder Strategy. Author, Juan ERWR. Chapter 922. When Lance heard what Reincarnation said, a hint of blood flashed across his eyes. His blue eyes seemed to have cooled down for a moment. He turned to look at Lily and interrupted Reincarnation. Chinya's words. Miss Yun? Chinese Taoism is profound and profound. I have always longed for it before, but now I have the opportunity to see it with my own eyes. If I go out from here, I hope Miss Yun can open my eyes. When Reincarnation heard him open his mouth, she suddenly realized that she had said the wrong thing. Her expression was a little cautious for a moment. Lily knew that Lance had evil intentions, but he was plotting against Reincarnation and had nothing to do with her. I don't know what this was. She was not prepared to deal with foreigners from where she came from. After finding a way out here, she was prepared to go their separate ways with Lance, so she did not want to greet him. When he heard his question, Lily sneered twice. Who are you, what do you have to do with me, and how much did you give me? Do you want to broaden your horizons? I didn't expect you to be ugly, but I thought you were quite beautiful. Lily said this without saving any face for Lance. Reincarnation was very angry when she heard it. However, Lance still maintained his demeanor and did not turn his face. Instead, he smiled with an open-minded look on his face. That's right. I'm sorry that I haven't had the opportunity to introduce myself to you all. My name is Lance and I come from England. He did not say his surname, only his first name. Lily had also entered the mission many times. The advantage of this was that she had accumulated a lot of missions over a long period of time. She had far more common sense in a certain aspect than ordinary people. As far as she was concerned, as you know, being a British person only has a first name but no surname. This situation only occurred in the early Middle Ages and after the Middle Ages. In order to facilitate distinction, British people will start to identify their surnames by occupation, place name, appearance, and even church. This Lance has no surname but a first name, and his skin is pale, although he does not have the aura of a ghost. But he was not popular at all. Sitting on the boat, Lily could not even hear the sound of his heartbeat. He was extremely powerful. And walking freely in the dark, all of this reminded her of a legendary creature, a vampire. To ordinary people, a vampire is just a creature that seems to have been invented by the church. After all, not many people have ever seen a vampire. For modern people who do not believe in ghosts and gods, vampires are more of a noun-like existence. But ordinary people don't believe in the existence of vampires, but Lily does. She has seen all kinds of gods and ghosts. She has dealt with legendary dragons and gods, and even became an old Jinghe dragon during a mission. Although she has never seen a vampire with her own eyes before, she believes that such a thing exists. Lance's features especially resemble this, but Lily still needs to verify them. Thinking of this, Lily did not raise her head after hearing Lance introduce himself, as if taking a stack of talismans. After sitting on the boat, she took out the cinnabar and started drawing talismans. Some of the talismans dipped in the cinnabar on her fingers were real drawn talisman. On one of them, she wrote in traditional Chinese, and she quickly drew 7 talisman papers. While doing all this, Lance's eyes kept falling on Lily, while Reincarnation was a little dissatisfied. Didn't your parents teach you that you shouldn't be so rude when talking to others? Miss Wen, I don't read as much as people like you. I also know a lot of principles. Lily folded the talisman after drawing it. At the same time, she took something else and put the cinnabar into her bag. Only ugly people need to study more. I understand this sentence now that I see you. After she finished speaking, she handed a piece of talisman to Lance. Lance saw her move. The reaction was huge and he quickly took a step back. Although he made a big movement when he stood up, the boat itself was made of black insects in the water and was very stable. It didn't even sway at this moment, but his movements were too excited, and there was even a look of vigilance on his face. It's really eye-catching. Tang Quan and others were already nervous, but when they saw Lance's actions, they couldn't help but be startled and looked towards him. Lance's eyes turned cold, and Lily said, "This place is weird. I drew a few peace charms. You might as well take them with you." "Thank you, Miss Yun, for your kindness." Lance breathed a sigh of relief when he heard what Lily said. Instead of taking the talisman handed over by Lily, he carefully stretched out an excessively white hand to hold her other hand. He drew the talisman with traditional Chinese characters in his hand alone. "I am really afraid of Chinese Taoism, and I almost misunderstood the lady's kindness." He just stared at Lily's talisman. For many modern people, many people may not be able to tell whether the talisman is written in traditional Chinese and what strokes it is drawn on, but Lance can see it without saying anything, and for normal talisman paper with fear in mind, he reached out and took away the talisman, which was just a piece of waste paper. Apart from living a long life, she really couldn't think of any other reason why a foreigner could be so well informed. Lily confirmed her suspicion. When he heard what he said, she just smiled and couldn't make a sound. "I don't know where Wen Qingye provoked such a thing. This trip to the ancient tomb is really a wave of ups and downs. I wonder if the original protagonist has met these two people in the plot. If so, I also knew that the original owner would definitely not be able to get out of this ancient tomb. Even if she could escape from the hands of the zombie ghosts in the cemetery, she might not be able to escape from the clutches of this vampire in the end. But if she did not meet him, then Wen Qingye would be killed by this vampire. If you take it to the tomb, you will definitely die." She pursed her lips and distributed the talisman to everyone's hands. Wen Qingye did not reach out to take it. Mrs. Wen was afraid that Lily would not give it to her, so she stretched out her hand to grab two pieces. As soon as she got the talisman, she originally held it tightly. The white bones holding her palm trembled, and the female ghost in red spoke quietly. "Chief Fairy, this lady broke off Ji Niang's hand and threw it into the river. Ji Niang's body was broken, and she had to stay with her. Unless this lady returned the Wang family's sister's palm to its original place, her soul could return to its original place." When Mrs. Wen heard this, her body shook even more violently. Don't follow me, help me." Lily suddenly thought of. "Did you break it when you were on the mountain wall?" The female ghost turned around and seemed to have a conversation with someone, then nodded. "Ji Niang originally wanted to prevent you from entering the tomb, so she grabbed Mrs. Wen's hair. Unexpectedly, she cut off Ji Niang's hand and threw it into the river. The female ghost once called the person named Ji Niang the sister of the Wang family. The few survivors all thought of the female ghost on the mountain wall who called herself Wang. Now when they heard this ghost talk, they naturally understood in their hearts that she was the Wang family's sister. "What's going on?" Tang Quan turned blue with anger, gritted his teeth and glared at Mrs. Wen. "Mrs. Wen, the old man originally respected you as a scholar and knowledgeable person, but I didn't expect you to be such a person. On the mountain wall, you summoned this ghost here, and you even slandered Xiaoun when you were in the blood pool before. It's so shameless." "The whole family is shameless," Zhao Hongsheng snorted. The mother and daughter were tricked into the ancient tomb by Mrs. Wen. Now their mother, Mrs. Mu, has died because of Mrs. Wen's actions. She hates Mrs. Wen. The bloodshot eyes were filled with murderous intent. The middle-aged plump man said nothing, but he also stared at Mrs. Wen with hatred, and Mrs. Wen did not dare to speak out. Seeing this scene, Wen Qingye began to ask her mother in a low voice what happened. He leaned close to her ear in a low voice and told what happened. The surroundings were quiet, and only the whispers of the Wen family and their daughters could be heard. The boat had sailed very far at this time, and Lily was sitting on the boat. I got a rough overview of what happened along the way. This cemetery has almost hollowed out the entire mountain. From the current view, As the female ghost said, the river has almost surrounded the main tomb. It is just because the journey has not been completed yet, so the second half is not seen. The structure of this main tomb is not complicated. The entire tomb is like the skeleton of an open umbrella, with the cemetery in the middle. But when the boat went very far, Lily suddenly discovered a problem, and her face became a little solemn. Patted the female ghost. Turn up the lights? Which direction did we just roll down from? The female ghost was a little helpless. These will-o'-the-wisps originally looked very scary, but Lily actually regarded them as lighting objects. She followed the instructions and brightened the fire, and pointed in the direction that everyone had left behind, with a somewhat frightened look on her face. That's over there, the female fairy chief. You can't go any further. If you go any further, the fairy chief will make the slave family's soul fly away, and the slave family won't dare. There seemed to be something in front of her that made her very scared. Lily closed her eyes. Smiled bitterly in his heart. The center of the cemetery is a complete circle, but the tomb of Emperor Xiao clearly only occupies a part of the front of the cemetery. She had previously speculated that the cemetery existed as a tomb within a tomb, and now I am afraid it has come true. The coffin of Emperor Xiao of Wei Cao Lan was parked in the Five Elements and Bagua formation. The blood pool seemed huge, but once he got out of it, standing in the river and looking at it from a distance, it only took up half of the inner body of the mountain. The remaining half must be used by someone else. This Lance entered the ancient tomb for something. When he heard about the coffin of Emperor Xiao Cao Lan, Wen Qin and Ya were obviously very excited, but he was unusually cold, which shows that his ambition was not in Cao Ian's coffin, but at this time, it was already very obvious what his purpose was. I don't know what was buried in the second half. Even the old vampire was moved, but the female ghost was very afraid of it. She would rather be beaten to death by her than dare to go forward. Lily's heart was cold and her eyes were hard. Searching around, Zatu wanted to find a way out. It would be fine if the treasures buried in the second half were just treasures. But in her opinion, the young man who gave Cao Lan the idea was obviously not an ordinary person. What he had laid out, even people like Lily, who have experienced many lives, admire these formations, which shows how brilliant they are. Such a truly Taoist man cannot be used by Cao Lan just for worldly power. What Lily is afraid of is the body of the Taoist priest that was buried in the second half. To be continued. Canon Fodder Strategy. Author, Juan ERWR. Chapter 923. The cemetery is so large and nourished by yin qi and resentment. It is obvious that the people in the tomb hope to survive in another way after thousands of years. Ordinary people like Cao Lan can use the cemetery to transform into a ferocious person. Extreme zombies. If Lily's guess is correct, the person buried in the second half of the tomb is actually the young man who had extraordinary abilities back then. Over the past 800 years, we can see how far he will have grown. The cold hairs on her back stood up involuntarily, and her body began to tremble uncontrollably. Lily had been nervous before when she met a dragon snake or a female ghost later, or even when she was forced into the bottom of a well by a pool of blood to activate the Emperor's body, but she had never felt that death was so close to her, and there was a sense of heaviness. It rose from the bottom of her heart, causing her whole face to slowly turn pale. Are you sure there is no way out of here? The female ghost shook her head. There is indeed no way out. There are monster dragons guarding the entrance. This place is originally a situation where there is no return. The female fairy has a profound Taoism and should have seen through it long ago. After the female ghost finished speaking, she glanced at Lance. The slave family only dares to send you here. I really can't go. After she finished speaking, Lily nodded. Just as he was about to let her go back the way she came, she sighed quietly in Lily's ear. Fairy, be careful. This weird Persian uncle of the Yuna family seems to be a bit dangerous. He has no trace of life in him, but is like a walking corpse. He has no resentment, but is covered in blood. I don't know what kind of spirit he transformed into. It's really weird. When she said this, her voice seemed to only ring in Lily's ear, which further confirmed Lily's previous guess. Lily nodded and was about to ask her to return the way she came. Suddenly, Lance, who was sitting on the boat, laughed. "You've come here, why go back? There is an old saying in China, which is to make peace with what is coming. Why should Miss Yoon leave in a hurry? Why don't we all go in and have a look together?" After he finished speaking, he looked down at Lily and smiled. "There is no way back, why not move forward?" Tang Quan and others instinctively felt that something was not right, so they subconsciously moved closer to Lily. Wen Kanya was sitting firmly beside Lance. Mrs. Wen still didn't understand the situation in front of her. She heard the female ghost said before that the palm would always follow her unless she sent it back to its original position. He was so frightened that he didn't notice what Lance said at all. He was only trembling all over, looking at the bone-white palm and wanting to cry without tears. "Is there a way? Someone found it? You can't do it just because of your words." The atmosphere gradually became tense. Lily was surrounded by Tang Quan and 3 other people, and she was with Lance, Wen Kanya, and her daughter. A confrontation was formed, and her fingers that were originally resting between her legs began to draw on the side of her thigh. As she forcibly lifted the Taoist technique, the wounds on her back began to hurt. But she gritted her teeth and endured it. None of the others noticed her little move, but Lance saw it. "Has Miss Yoon been injured before? I smell a sweet and dangerous breath." After he finished speaking, he smiled with his green eyes. He closed it, took a deep breath, his pale and handsome face showed a somewhat intoxicated look, and then he quickly opened his eyes. "As Miss Yoon said, you can find out whether there is a road ahead. Maybe there is a road ahead. Go all the way." This Lance behaved like a gentleman at first. Tang Quan and others were originally very fond of him because of his polite manners, but when they heard him speak, a bad premonition came to their hearts. Zhao Hongxian gritted her teeth. "I'm not going, just now. That Yunyang has already said that she can't go anymore. Xiaoun, let's go back and find the way. After all, they almost died in this ancient tomb." The few people were not as indifferent as they were when they first entered the ancient tomb. Zhao Hongxian was close to Lily, feeling Lily's tight body, and couldn't help but hold on to Lily's arm. Lily nodded, and Lance laughed softly. "The way back? There is no way back here, let's go forward. We can't go any further." Tang Quan shook his head, his face solemn. Before he could finish speaking, Lance's eyes, which had been gentle before, suddenly turned cold. "That's not up to you." After he finished speaking, he stood at the edge of the boat. The hull was made of black insects. Lance was wearing black clothes and pants, almost blending in with the surrounding river, as if it was going to happen next moment. As if melting into this overwhelming darkness, several people were surprised. The fat middle-aged man even subconsciously shouted, "Careful! Thank you for your concern." Lance showed a few white teeth and stepped out. After getting out of the boat, a group of insects in the river surrounded his feet. He frowned his delicate eyebrows in disgust. "Disgusting stuff. I had a great time getting along with you all along the way. If possible, I really hope to make friends with you, a group of very interesting Taoist priests in China, especially Ms. Yoon." "It's a pity." At this point, Langston said after a pause, he stuck out his tongue and licked the bright red lips. The smile on his face now looked a little seductive and evil. "Miss Wen is right. I came here for a purpose, but I don't want you to spoil my big event." After he said that, he jumped out of the boat. Before these bugs could wrap around his body, he reached into the hull of the boat, grabbed a handful of insects, and quickly ran forward. In this river, he ran as if he were walking on flat ground. The insects that entangled him and tried to drag him into the water became his stepping stones. There were 5 or 6 people in the hull, plus these insects. The weight was no longer light, but he seemed not to feel the weight at all, dragging the boat very fast, and quickly ran towards the direction not far away where the female ghost said she would rather die than go. Not only was he able to stand firm in the river, he was also able to maintain this lightning-like speed. Because of his sprint, his golden hair flew up, and the shirt on his body was like a sail filled with enough wind before he blinked. In a short time, the boat had been dragged forward for nearly 10 meters. Lily stood up with a gloomy face. "Where do you want to take us?" "I'd like you to go with me for the time being. I know Miss Yoon is very capable, and I also like to associate with capable people. However, this river is very dangerous. If Miss Yoon wants to fight me here, I'm afraid there will be some trouble." Lance turned his head and stopped. Once it stopped, in just a moment, the insects under his feet in the water were entangled and dragged Lance into the water. The female ghost showed a somewhat relieved smile on her pale face. Several people on the boat were a little confused. They looked covered, but the next moment there was a sound of water, and the bottom of the ship's core made of black insects seemed to have been drilled out at once. A large amount of river water came in, and the soles of several people's feet were soaked. Lance, who was soaked all over, slowly rose from the center of the cracked bottom of the boat. His golden hair was spread on his face, and a few black bugs hung on his shoulders and ears. There were several bugs on his cheeks burrowing around in his almost transparent white cheeks, like blue blood vessels under the skin. Some bugs entered half of his body, while the remaining half remained outside his cheeks. Such a horrific scene made his originally handsome face look a bit distorted and sad, making people shiver at the sight. The originally black shirt on his body had been torn by the black insects in the water within a moment of Lance falling into the water. Like a funnel, the clothes were torn in many places and fell off, revealing a large area of pale and strong chest. Seeing such a terrifying scene, Zhao Hongxian couldn't help but scream, "Ah!" Lance didn't take it seriously at all. He even slowly pulled out the remaining half of the worm left on his cheek. He didn't seem to feel any pain at all. After suffering such a serious injury, his body hanging with black bugs, he's not even dead yet. The insect was slowly pulled away from his cheek, and the insect's body inside the flesh squirmed rapidly, causing his face to twitch slightly. While doing all this, Lance was still smiling softly. He slowly pulled the bug away from the flesh and blood on his cheek. When the bug was pulled out, a hole about the size of a finger was exposed on his originally fair skin. A bloody hole appeared. When everyone saw this scene, their teeth collided with each other. But an even more terrifying thing happened. The wound that was still bleeding began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye as the bug left the body. Just like a plot on TV, in just 1 or 2 seconds, the place that was bleeding before was restored to its original state. Not to mention that there was a wound here a second ago, now the wound is not visible at all, not even the edge of the wound. All the floating blood streaks disappeared, and his fair and delicate skin returned to its original state. This method made several people in the boat subconsciously hold their breath. The female ghost's face was extremely ugly. When she was about to wave again the next second, Lance turned his head and glanced at her. He shook his head in a big way. The golden hair threw out a string of water drops, and the next moment he grabbed Zhao Hongxian like lightning. Zhao Hongxian saw a black shadow rushing towards her, and subconsciously covered her face with her hands, holding the lily blocked the peace charm she had given her before. When Lance saw the talisman, a look of fear appeared on his face. Then he turned around without hesitation and caught Mrs. Wen, who was unprepared for him, in his palm. At Wenkanya's stunned move, he grabbed Mrs. Wen's hair tightly, pulled her head to the right, exposed Mrs. Wen's already wrinkled neck, and bit it in one bite with a puff sound. "Help!" Mrs. Wen trusted Lance wholeheartedly a moment ago. This was a man that her daughter believed in. She never thought that Lance would bite her. When she came to her senses and wanted to shout for help, Lance's two canine teeth had bitten into the main artery between her neck. To be continued. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Cannon Fodder Strategy. Author, Juan ERWR. Chapter 924. Gudong gudong, the sound of blood being swallowed up in a big mouth sounded. Mrs. Wen's face turned red at first, and then gradually turned pale. The peace charm she held in her hand fell to the ground, and was quickly thrown into the insect ship. The river water was stained, and due to her survival instinct, she was still desperately grabbing Lance's back with her hands. At this moment, she could hear the sound of her own heartbeat beating rapidly, but soon with the loss of a large amount of blood, her body temperature dropped. She descended rapidly, her heart beat slower and slower, the light in her eyes became weaker and weaker, her originally extremely tight body gradually softened, and the hand that Mrs. Wen originally held on Lance's back finally dropped weakly. Go down. Phew, Lance had eaten and drank enough. Before Mrs. Wen's heart stopped beating, he raised his face. His flawless face was now full of blood, and Mrs. Ian's neck seemed to have been bitten by a wild beast. Usually, a large piece of flesh flew up. Now her face was so pale that there was no trace of blood. The blood was dripping down her neck. She could no longer breathe. It was human nature to fear death. She subconsciously turned her gaze towards Lily, looked over, her lips moved, but she had no strength to speak. Lance threw Mrs. Wen, whose blood had been almost drained by him, into the river as if she were throwing away garbage. The river gradually covered her, and waves of black bugs entangled her. She was as she was about to be dragged into the river, only two bubbles appeared on the surface of the river. Mrs. Wen didn't even utter a scream, and was never heard from again. This incident happened so quickly that before anyone could react, Mrs. Wen's throat was bitten off and she was thrown into the bottom of the river. Lance elegantly stretched out his tongue and licked his lips. Wen Kanya, who was stunned at the side, seemed to wake up suddenly, opened her mouth like crazy and screamed. Ah! Shut up, Lance turned around and scolded her. His pair of coquettishly green eyes exuded a frightening brilliance, and Wen Kanya's expression soon began to become dull. Half of the scream seemed to have been swallowed by her, and the tranquility returned to the river surface. I've heard a lot in the Bible and seen a lot on TV, but this is the first time I've seen a real vampire. Lily had already guessed Lance's true identity, but she didn't expect him to be the first to show up. Mrs. Wen took action, and now Lance showed his true face, obviously intending to quarrel with each other. She originally wanted to pretend that she didn't know the identity of Lance, and wanted to find a way to leave and be on good terms with him, but she didn't expect this. The vampire probably never thought of letting her go. This vampire lived for an unknown number of years. If her magic power was at its peak, Lily would not necessarily be afraid of him, but she had only entered this mission not long ago, her Taoist skills were not very good, and she had just been entangled by the 8 corpse slaves above. At this time, the magic power in her body was most of it has been consumed, and the most important thing is that she is still injured. When it comes to a real fight, the vampire in the river is immortal. It can be seen from the fact that he fell into the river and survived, while the others are mortal bodies and are restricted by him in every way. Lily was trying to stay calm at this time, even though she was unsure, she still wouldn't show it on the surface. When Zhao Hongsheng and Tang Quan heard that Lance was a vampire, their expressions became obviously ugly. No one mourned Mrs. Wen's death, and there were many crises in this ancient tomb. Finally escaped from the blood pool. After escaping from the corpse of Emperor Xiao of Wei State, something happened like this. Although Mrs. Wen was dead, the thought of herself and others ending up in this situation was all related to her. Several people were cursing in their hearts, and they felt particularly happy when they thought about the death of Mr. and Mrs. Wen. I really made Miss Yoon laugh just now. I have been hungry for a few days, and blood can give me strength, so I can't help but eat in front of you. Lance smiled and licked the blood off the corner of his mouth. He even took out a handkerchief from nowhere and gently wiped the remaining blood on his neck and chin like an elegant gentleman after a meal. Miss Yoon is a true hero among women. Don't worry, I won't kill you for the time being. I have something to ask of you. Let's cooperate. I promise I won't hurt you when the thing is done. How about that? This Lance had a face like an angel, but a heart like a devil. Lily refused to believe what he said at all. He showed his true face in front of everyone, and it was obvious that he no longer wanted to bring everyone alive. Let go of your thoughts here, and then let a few people go after the thing is done. This is usually the dirty part of the devil in fairy tales. Usually in a plot, when a bad guy wants to kill someone first, he will coax the victim to do something for him. If the thing is done, firstly, the murder will be silenced, and secondly, the victim has no use value. How can he still leave alive? However, in the crisis, Zhao Hongxian and others were afraid of losing their lives, so they all believed these words to be true. Lily smiled coldly. What a strong tone. Although I have never dealt with vampires, there are so many zombies. You are nothing more than a Western species. Do you think I will be afraid of you? You won't kill me for the time being. How do you know that I won't kill you for the time being? Will I kill you? When Lance heard what she said, his expression was a little serious at first, and then he laughed out loud. I believe what Miss Yoon said. If Miss Yoon was at her peak, I would really not hesitate to take Miss Wen away and walk separately with you. But if I am not wrong, Miss Yoon was seriously injured, even if you are not as strong as you are. Strong, can you still show off your skills at this time? When he spoke, the body that was standing next to Wen Qingya flashed like a ghost again, and soon appeared next to Lily, stretching out a hand. Just when he was about to catch her, the 5 thunder curse that Lily had drawn in the morning and clasped it in her palm suddenly hit him head on. There was a thunderous sound, and the female ghost Yunyang let out a scream, and her body quickly floated out of the hull. The thunder spell has a certain restraint effect on evil things, and the female ghost is naturally afraid of this thing. But Lance didn't expect that Lily would be prepared. He stretched out his hand and didn't touch Lily's shoulder. The next moment, the thunder hit his cheek. When he fell into the water and was bitten by insects, Lance did not scream, but now when he was struck by lightning, he let out a sharp and shrill scream. The sound was so penetrating that he subconsciously reached out to cover his face. However, the 5 thunder curse was particularly powerful. Purple electric light swam across his face, making a sizzling sound of electricity, and a burst of flesh and blood came from all around. The smell of being burned, he touched his face with his hand, and let out a cry again. He was knocked to the ground by the power of thunder and lightning. A large number of black bugs poured in around the broken hull, entangled it, Lance, but he didn't care about all this. He let out a cry of pain, and after a while, he let go of the hand covering his cheek. His originally fair and smooth skin was now burnt by lightning with a palm-sized wound. The skin cracked open, revealing the bloody flesh inside. The vampire's recovery ability was originally extremely powerful. The tender flesh at the wound squirmed and recovered quickly, while the other side was squirming. It was destroyed again under the power of the lightning attached to it. This repeated pain caused even a powerful race like vampires could not endure it at all. Most of Lance's golden hair had been burnt, and was damaged by lightning. His hair did not grow back for a while. His eyelids had been blown open, and a white eyeball with a hint of green was exposed. Most of the time, the scene was as horrifying as it was terrifying. He kept trembling, grinning, and breathing rapidly, and his cheek muscles twitched slightly due to pain. "I'm sorry, I don't like people to touch me casually, don't you know?" Seeing Lance's appearance, Lily gloated and laughed, as if the blow just now didn't consume much energy in her body, but the little mana left in her body was lost after the 5 thunder curses were blasted out. Then she was beaten to the last drop. If the blow just now had been an ordinary zombie, she was sure that it would have seriously injured the zombie, but this vampire only injured half of her face. She tried her best to hold back her subconsciously trembling body. He swallowed back the taste of blood that came to his mouth, and felt a burning pain in his back vest. On the side, Tang Quan noticed something strange about her, and subconsciously stretched out his hand to support her arm. Lily relaxed a little and leaned over, looking coldly. Looking at Lance, who was lying on the ground and tightly wrapped in insects, he asked slowly. "Now, don't you want to kill me just yet?" Lance's heart has stopped beating since he was first embraced more than 700 years ago. For more than 700 years, he believed that he was at the top of the food chain. Lance believed that humans who could harm him had stopped beating. Very rarely, in the Middle Ages, after he became a vampire, some priests among humans could still harm him. However, after the Middle Ages, as religion slowly declined, and his strength gradually declined with age, as time went by, his enemies gradually became fewer and fewer. In the past 700 years, he has also been to China and met some so-called Taoist priests, but in his opinion, these Taoist techniques are not as lethal as the holy water blessed by some bishops in the church who have some believers. But he has grown up to this point, and the holy water can cause him some trouble at most. The current bishops can no longer kill him. Even if they hold many holy objects passed down from their ancestors, they will only hurt him at most. He really didn't expect this time I took Wenkanya into this ancient tomb that I accidentally discovered more than 200 years ago. Among the survivors I met, there was a seemingly inconspicuous ordinary woman who did not rely on holy objects and did not have any telepathy in her body. Existence, without borrowing any objects, she could hurt him so easily. Not only did it cause great harm to his body, but this injury also came with some mithril-like effects, making his wounds more than just it cannot heal, but continues to get worse. To be continued. Cannon Fodder Strategy. Author, Juan ERWR. Chapter 925. The continuous pain at the wound made Lance feel as if his heart was beating crazily due to fear. While he was desperately sucking in cool air to relieve the burning pain on his cheek, his powerful self-healing ability was what brought him endless pain and more injuries at this time. He did not dare to reach out to touch his face. The palm that had just touched his cheek was now burnt and black, and he could not recover for a long time. Feeling the pain, he clenched his hands into fists, and after a long while, he reached out and pulled away the black bugs tied to his body. Lily's blow just now made him fearful. Although he guessed that Lily was injured, he had just received a blow from her carelessly. At this time, Lance did not dare to act rashly. Seeing Lily's calm look, he didn't know how much strength she still had, and he didn't know whether the method she used to attack him just now was a warning or a spell with more powerful lethality, because he found that Lily's attack seemed to burst out instantly, and he was knocked down in an instant. This made his face feel even more painful when he thought about it. After he got up, he did not dare to go over. Instead, he slowly moved closer to the side of the boat and sat next to Wenkanya. He reached out and grabbed Wenkanya. The hand, the face that looked extremely scary after the injury, looked a little uncertain. Miss Yoon is so amazing. For a long time, Lance carefully stared at Lily's face, as if he had made up his mind. To be honest with what Miss Yoon said, there are things I need in the back half of the mountain, but there are some ancient Chinese restrictions that I cannot open. The things inside have no effect on humans, but they are of great use to humans. I swear to God, if Miss Yoon is willing to help me, I can swear not to hurt a finger of Miss Yoon. And after the thing is done, as long as Miss Yoon opens her mouth, I will do my best to do whatever I can. The blow just now consumed all the remaining mana in Lily's body. At this moment, her muscles ached even when she moved. She stared at Lance coldly, as if she was very cautious, when she heard Lance say that he would not hurt anyone. It was obvious that Zhao Hongxian, Tang Quan, and others had happy expressions on their faces. Why should I believe you? Don't you find it ridiculous that a believer who has long been abandoned by God swears by God? If Lily had agreed without hesitation right now, Lance would probably be a little suspicious. But now she has a tough attitude and even treats him as sarcastically as before, which actually makes Lance feel more confident. Although Lily was injured, she must still have the feeling that she had not yet used her strength. He tried his best to relax his expression, gritted his teeth and endured the severe pain of the thunder and lightning on his cheeks, and a hint of greed flashed through his green eyes. It's true. To tell you the truth, when I came this time, I originally wanted to see Miss Chinese first. I swore that I would never hurt Miss Yun. For a truly capable person like Miss Yun, I just want to be with you. Forever friend, please believe me, I have been to this tomb several times, I know the way out. Doesn't Miss Yun want to leave? He tried his best to ensure that his attitude was no longer as arrogant and unscrupulous as before. At this moment, his eyes were fixed on Lily, and he didn't know what he thought of, with a fanatical brilliance in his eyes. The things in the tomb are very important to me. If Miss Yun is willing to cooperate with me, I will treat you as a benefactor. There is an old Chinese saying that a drop of kindness should be repaid by a spring. Although I am not Chinese, I have lived in China for many years. Please believe me, Miss Yun. Tang Quan was very eager to leave the ancient tomb. This time he came in and almost died several times. Although he was old, he had made up his mind when he first encountered danger that he would die in this ancient tomb. Among them, but now there is a glimmer of hope in front of them. If they can get out, who doesn't want to live? What's more, his junior brother Yunmin is still in the prison outside. If a few of them can't get out, Yunmin will have to eat prison food for the rest of his life. Thinking of this, Tang Quan glanced at Lily. Xiaoun, I don't think this foreign devil is telling lies. He was still a little wary of Lance. When he spoke, his eyes were fixed on Lance, fearing that he would suddenly get angry and hurt someone. When Lance heard what Tang Quan said, he raised his hands and even knelt on one knee in the boat, covering his chest with his uninjured hand. I swear by the spirit of chivalry that I will send Miss Yun back safely when the matter is completed. Moreover, I just heard from this lady that Mrs. Wen used money to trick you into coming in. Now that Mrs. Wen is dead, she owes Miss Yun the money. I will pay for her. Lance has lived for many years, so he naturally has the confidence to say such a thing. Money is just a number to a vampire. There have been so many casualties in this trip, and now he no longer dares to just survive. Let's stop thinking about money. After all, after Mrs. Wen died and when Kanya fell in love with this vampire again, the Wen family will definitely not be able to get any more money. Everyone has already given up the idea of getting money. But unexpectedly, things would turn around. At this time, Lance took the initiative to make such a promise in order to ask for Lily's help. Not only was Zhao Hongxian stunned for a moment, but the middle-aged and plump man also had hope in his eyes. The apprentice died, and it would be good if he could get some compensation to his parents after leaving. He was obviously moved, but when he saw Lily's face, he didn't dare to say anything, and just stared at her pleadingly. As soon as Lance finished speaking, he saw that everyone's expressions had changed, and they couldn't help but show a more sincere expression. After hearing his assurance, the vigilance on Tang Quan's face faded even more. Xiaoun, look, your father still needs money. Tang Quan's persuasion seemed to have some effect. Lily's face showed a look of struggle and hesitation. After a long time, she seemed to be convinced and frowned. If there is really a chance to leave this ancient tomb, it is not impossible to cooperate. After all, I am indeed injured now. If we can preserve the strength of both parties and no longer consume each other's strength, If you can really keep your promise, it is not impossible to cooperate with each other. But after the matter is completed, you must send us out of the ancient tomb as you said, and give us 500 million Chinese coins." When talking about it later, Lily's expression became much more serious. "I know that vampires have some abilities. The body's ability to heal after being injured is extremely powerful, and blood is the source of your life. But you must swear that if you dare to go back on your word, your head will be dislocated and you will not die a good death, no matter how powerful the vampire is, but once the heart and head are completely destroyed, they will definitely not survive." Lily didn't want to believe the lies that Lance said at all. The more outrageous he said, the more it proved that he had more ghosts in his heart. But at this time, it was difficult to get off the horse. If she insisted on turning her back, the empty city plan might not be able to scare Lance. Go, there must be something extremely important to him in this ancient tomb, so he is willing to kneel down in front of him at this time and make up these lies. Since that thing is so important, he will not allow himself and others to leave, even if worrying about her strength, it is more likely that he will fight to the death. At this time, the mana in Lily's body is exhausted. Lance will definitely find this out if he takes action again, and the group of people will die here. It would be better to pretend to cooperate with him and take the opportunity to recover more spiritual power along the way, so that you can adapt accordingly. Even if you know that this trip is very dangerous, you can at least delay it for a while. In this current situation of certain death, say maybe this temporary cooperation can bring out some vitality. Lance was relieved when he heard Lily asking him to swear. He also guessed that Lily wanted to delay time, but even if he knew this, he was still helpless. As he said, since he discovered this ancient tomb, every time he comes here every few decades, but never once can he break the restriction. This time he asked when Kanya to come. In fact, he didn't know what to do. The place was too dangerous. Although he wanted to kill Lily and others. But I don't know what Lily's strength is, but if he is seriously injured, this trip will definitely return in vain. After waiting for more than 200 years, from the day when he accidentally discovered this ancient tomb, he has been thinking about it every time. He couldn't stop thinking about this day. He couldn't wait any longer. He couldn't tolerate anyone ruining his important event. Therefore, when Lily agreed, although a bit of gloom flashed through Lance's eyes very quickly, he still half knelt on the bottom of the boat and cautiously moved towards Lily. Lance was still a little wary of Lily's 5 thunder curse, but at this moment, in order to express his sincerity, he still raised his hands. After leaning over, he gently took Lily's hand on his knee and kissed it. He touched the back of her hand and made an oath according to what she said. Neither of them made any move, which made the two people who had their own secrets involuntarily heave a sigh of relief. An agreement on cooperation has been reached for the time being. The female ghost not far away looked at the scene here and floated in the river for a long time without daring to come over. Lily turned her head over there, spread her palms in the direction of the ghost, and said in her mouth, "Go back." A ray of spiritual light emitted from Yinhun's body. The female ghost, who looked solid before and could only stand in the river, after the light dissipated, her body gradually became transparent. She was a little surprised. After touching himself, his expression seemed much more energetic than before, and he thanked Lily from a distance. "Since you don't dare to go over there, you have to lend us this boat. You go back to the river and wait for me. If I can come, I will definitely pass you by." The female ghost nodded and bowed timidly to Lily Fu. Then her figure was slowly enveloped in a layer of black mist and gradually disappeared into the river. Lance sat next to Wen Kanya. Seeing all this, there was a dark and inexplicable look in his eyes. "I have long heard that Chinese Taoism is profound, but now I have truly seen a capable person." The plump middle-aged man was a little unconvinced, but when he saw Lily, he didn't dare to speak again. To be continued. Carrot. Cannon Fodder Strategy. Author, 1 ERWR. Chapter 926. As soon as the female ghost left, there was no one to control the boat, but the bug was still honest. Lance endured the pain on his cheek, jumped out of the boat and pulled the boat forward, while Lily sat in the boat without saying a word, closing her eyes and concentrating. After about half an hour, Lance finally pulled the black insect ship to the shore and parked it in a corner of the beach. Everyone got off the boat one by one, and the hull gradually turned into black insects, melting into the river and disappearing. Seeing this in the gloomy ancient tomb, Tang Quan and others felt chills running down their backs. It was pitch dark ahead, Lily's whole body was cold, and she held on to Tang Quan tightly. Lance had indeed been here before, and he led the way like an old horse knowing the way, and everyone slowly followed. It seemed like a path of mixed gravel and gravel, winding straight up and leading to nowhere. Since entering the ancient tomb, every time they walk in such a dark environment, the survivors will always start to become nervous instinctively. They don't know what is in front of them, but a chill is like a sharp-handled knife, cutting the naked body. The outside skin was so cold that my body shivered. It was very quiet all around, as quiet as the sound of several people stepping on the sand while walking could bring out an echo. There was a lot of cold sweat on Lily's forehead. Lance seemed very excited when he arrived here, and the darkness his footsteps could be heard. First he strode forward quickly, but as if he was afraid that everyone would lose him, he quickly turned back. After repeating this several times, Lance finally couldn't help but ask. "One sentence, Miss Yoon, can you go faster?" Lily wished she could walk more slowly. It took a lot of time, so how could she want to go faster? She heard Lance press. While trying his best to run the remaining power in his body, trying to make it flow faster, he said. "How fast do you want to go? Since you are so familiar with China, you should know that there is an old saying in China. Haste makes waste, and you can't eat hot tofu in a hurry. Why are you urging me? You also know that I am injured and can't walk much. Quick." She finished her words. A gust of wind blew over, and Lance stood beside her like lightning, pretending to carry her, but Lily stepped aside. "Don't people abroad know that men and women are not taught clearly? Miss Yoon, what do you want? I advise you." Lance's voice suddenly turned cold. Apparently, he was blocked by Lily's two words and could no longer maintain the composure he had forced before. Lily sneered and interrupted him. "What do you advise me? I advise you to be quiet and don't think that if I agree to cooperate with you temporarily, this cooperation can be maintained indefinitely. If we really want to break up, even if I am injured, I may not be able to. I can kill you. But it's very easy to hurt you at this point." Lily paused. In the darkness, Lance's green eyes were like those of a cat, exuding a gleaming and coquettish luster, which made people faint. "Han," Lily saw the murderous intent in his eyes and looked at him without hesitation. "Since there is something you want in this ancient tomb, you haven't been able to get it after several visits. If you were seriously injured, it would be more difficult to get it, right?" Lily's words immediately touched upon what worried Lance the most. The reason why he didn't kill Lily and others for the time being. The reason is for this, otherwise there is a heavy treasure in front, in order to prevent the news from leaking, even if the fish is dead and the net is broken. When he was just on the river, he had already taken action against Lily. He won't bow his head at all. At this moment, when Lily mentioned this, Lance felt angry in his heart. It felt uncomfortable to have his weak point being taken advantage of. He snorted coldly and strode forward again. The surrounding area soon became quiet again. Lily's originally tense expression, her body gradually relaxed, and she breathed a sigh of relief unconsciously. She stretched out her hand to wipe the cold sweat from her forehead before following him again. At that moment, Lance could feel the killing intent, but he could still bear it, which showed that the things in the tomb must be very important to him. A vampire has no use for gold, silver, jewelry, and other money, nor is he interested in any antiques. What is buried in the ancient tomb is nothing more than external objects, unless there are some magic weapons that he can take a fancy to. But even if it is a magical weapon, it has no effect on the vampire. Even if he is exchanging something he is interested in with someone, he does not need to be so eager. There must be something in this tomb that can enhance his strength. Vampires are not short of lifespan. He may not like what ordinary people like, but it will be different if the strength is increased. The strength of the vampire family comes from blood, and from blood. The length of survival time, if Lily's guess is correct, he really came here to enhance his strength. Lance was from the medieval period and should have lived for hundreds of years. His strength has been fixed. There can't be anything in this tomb that can be used to increase his strength. He gained hundreds of years of survival time for nothing, but he still came, so there must be something in the cemetery that can increase the excellence of his bloodline. Thinking of this, Lily remembered how the female ghosts in the river were afraid of this place. In addition, when the tomb was first built, it was a tomb within a tomb. The first half of the tomb was occupied by Cao Lan, Emperor Xiao of the Wei Kingdom, and the second half was probably buried with Cao Lan, Emperor Xiao of the Wei Kingdom. The body of the Taoist has been here for more than 700 years, and there is no lack of yin qi, resentment, spiritual energy. If it is the Taoist corpse that is really buried here, he would have been so skilled in Taoism at that time. 700 years later, the yin qi, resentment, and spiritual energy will remain here. Under the nourishment and worship of spiritual energy, even Cao Lan will evolve into what he is today. It is not surprising that the Taoists in the future may evolve into zombies. Lance's trip is probably just for this reason. Lily took a deep breath. Cao Lan was already so difficult to deal with. If another zombie with more terrifying strength appeared, Lily's back began to feel cold. The strength of the zombies in the tomb in the second half must be even more terrifying, otherwise the female ghost in there won't be scared like that. Moreover, Lance came several times without success. Firstly, it is possible that the zombie was sleeping. The zombie was a Taoist before his death. He could not break the protective formation set up by the Taoist, so the journey was extremely dangerous. Secondly, it's possible that he can't defeat this zombie. The best possibility is that if he wants to get this zombie and improve his bloodline, there must be some connection. Lily thinks of Wenkanya, who is still alive today. Lance seems to value her very much. Sat next to Wenkanya several times, and when they broke up with him, he still held Wenkanya's hand and did not kill her. He wanted Wenkanya alive and took her to the ancient tomb. Could it be that just because you want to sacrifice her alive? All the thoughts in her mind were like tangled threads, and the place was eerie and strange. On the one hand, Lily had to distract her mind to clear her inner thoughts, and on the other hand, she had to pay attention to the movements around her, and then she had to fight for time to regain her strength. As time went by, she would be able to regain her strength. He was calm, and cold sweat gradually broke out on his body, soaking the already dirty t-shirt. To everyone's surprise, they originally thought that the place where the female ghost was so afraid would be very dangerous. When Tang Quan and others entered the place where Cao Lan Lingshu was parked, they narrowly escaped from the mouth of the dragon, encountered the female ghost again, and even finally, after being rolled into a sarcophagus and forced into a pool of blood, they went through many dangers before escaping to Cao Ian's coffin. This time, they were all prepared that the journey would be extremely difficult, but they did not expect that the journey would be smooth. Time seemed to pass very quickly. I don't know how long they had walked. When the group's legs felt heavy and numb, Lance in front shouted in surprise. "Arrive!" His words interrupted Lily's thoughts, and Lily's heart sank. At this time, her strength had recovered less than 2/10. She could barely hit 3 of the 5 thunder spells at most, but for Lance, This was it will hurt his body at most, but it won't kill him. This journey may be dangerous. Lance didn't care so much. He took the lead and walked forward. After everyone followed, a cool breeze blew. There was actually wind here. He took out something from his body and rubbed it twice for some reason. With a puff sound, the thing in his hand gradually lit up. The group experienced darkness and suddenly saw light. They all subconsciously felt it was dazzling and closed their eyes. Lily also closed her eyes, but after quickly getting used to the light, she opened her eyes again. Lance was holding a copper pipe the size of a pen, with flames coming out of the mouth of the copper pipe. This place was full of gloom, and modern lighters and matches couldn't be lit here, but I didn't expect that he had the ability to prepare such a thing. As if seeing the surprise on Lily's face, Lance felt a little proud. This is the holy fire. I secretly collected it from the church, but it took me a lot of effort. His pale face looked a bit eerie and strange here. The wounds on his face were mostly healed now. Only a small piece was still not fully recovered. When Kanya stood beside him, seemingly stunned. Lily ignored him and turned to look at the place. She originally thought that since the owner and Cao Lan each had half of the tomb, this place would be very large and grand, but to her surprise, it was very simple. The place was about 20 square meters wide and as simple as a house. There were even cabinets and other simple furniture built out of stone around it. A stone bed was built in the middle, with a dark coffin resting on it. There was a low cabinet next to the coffin, and there was even something like a petroleum lamp on it. Except for a few corpses that were lying down and had turned into bones, nothing else could be seen. When Tang Quan and others saw the coffin, they first took a breath, and then involuntarily breathed a sigh of relief when they saw that the corpse beside the coffin had turned into bones. When they had just passed Cao Ian's coffin hub, they were frightened by the desperate guarding of several corpse slaves. They were still frightened and feared that the layout of this place would be similar to before. But seeing it now, Tang Quan wiped it off. The sweat on his forehead made him let out a long sigh of relief. To be continued. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Cannon Fodder Strategy. Author, Juan ERWR. Chapter 927. I have been here 7 or 8 times. Every once in a while, I will come here after finding something good, but every time I fail, my patience is gradually worn out. Lance laughed. He stood up, showed his strong white teeth, and pointed at the corpses placed around him. Look at the people who died here. Every time I come here, I bring one with me, but it's no use. As Lance said this, his expression gradually became a little irritable. The surroundings were extremely quiet, and everyone could only hear that he was getting more and more serious. With a tone of voice, his green eyes began to turn red. He grabbed Wen Kanya into his hand, held Wen Kanya's neck and walked towards the coffin. I tried my best, but at most I opened some lids but couldn't reach in. Miss Yun, ancient Chinese civilization does have its own uniqueness. Now, it's time for you to fulfill our agreement. After he finished speaking, he grabbed Wen Kanya and threw her onto the coffin. There was a bang sound. Wen Kanya, who was originally stunned, let out a cry of pain when she was hit by this collision, and her eyes, which were originally dull, gradually woke up. She rubbed her shoulder that hurt from being hit by the corner of the coffin. After seeing the scene in front of her clearly, her expression was a little dazed at first, and then she screamed loudly as if she remembered something. Ah, Mom! Although Mrs. Wen had mentioned to her that Mr. Wen was dead before, Wen Kanya did not see it with her own eyes. Although she cried twice, it was still not as tragic as seeing Mrs. Wen being bitten through the throat and then being sucked to death. What's more, the one who bit Mrs. Wen's neck was Lance, whom she had always secretly liked in her heart. When Kanya's body was trembling violently when she saw Lance standing in front of her. She no longer relied on and liked him as before. Instead, she was trembling all over, grabbing the coffin and crying desperately. Help, help. In the critical situation, she clutched the lid of the coffin with her hands. Lance sneered and walked towards her. Seeing this scene, Kanya shivered more and more as Lance got closer. Don't come over here. Don't come over here. After she shouted, she moved her legs to run away, but she only ran a few steps away. Lance, who had been standing by the coffin before, stood next to her like a ghost, and stretched out his hand to grab her back again. After running away like this 2 or 3 times, and each time being caught again after not being able to run very far, Kanya collapsed. She covered her face and cried. Why Lance? Why? Kanya's hair was now disheveled, and her clothes had been torn apart by Lance during her escape and capture. She reached out and clutched the coffin tightly, trying to hide away while looking at Lily for help. Please. Help me, please. Lance sneered and ignored her. Instead, he reached out and touched the coffin board. I have been here too many times and I have no patience. Miss Wen, you'd better be quiet. You are still useful to me. I don't want to kill you, but you are too noisy. It will make me unbearable. He said this. The scream that came out of Kanya's mouth stopped in an instant. She bit her lower lip, trembling all over and collapsed in the gap of the stone table next to the coffin, tears flowing continuously. His nose quivered, and he let out a rapid breathing sound. Look at her finally being quiet. Only then did Lance praise, grab the coffin lid with both hands, and lift it with all his strength. Good girl. Before he could finish his words, the coffin lid was lifted open by him in an instant. Lance had tried to use force before, but he didn't expect that the coffin lid was not as heavy as he thought. He used too much force and backed away while holding the coffin lid. After a few steps, a look of disbelief appeared on a handsome face. He held the coffin lid with both hands and didn't put it down for a while, his eyes filled with astonishment. Obviously, it couldn't be opened before? What's going on? My God! He came to this place 7 or 8 times before, and the first time he couldn't even push the coffin lid away. Over the next 200 years, he tried every means and stole several items from the vampire clan. With the help of these things, I finally successfully pushed the coffin lid open when I entered this place last time and saw the scene inside. This time he came with Kanya. Although he was determined to get the contents of the coffin, he had no idea whether he could open the coffin, but he didn't expect it to go so smoothly this time. In a few breaths, Lance's face showed some surprise at first, and then showed a look of ecstasy. He threw the coffin lid in his hand to the ground, and as if going crazy, he grabbed the coffin with both hands and pulled hard. There was a click sound, and the solid coffin instantly dispersed. With a clang sound, the wood fell to the ground, revealing the figures hugging each other on the stone bed in the middle. Yes, it worked. I succeeded. Lance suddenly laughed loudly and threw the 2 broken wooden boards in his hands to the ground. His handsome and gentle face turned red with excitement, and it was a bit white. Blue blood vessels burst out under the transparent skin, and a pair of green eyes exuded a coquettish brilliance. As he laughed loudly, after the coffins were scattered, the figures who were originally crowded in the small coffin slowly the situation where the 2 of them were hugging each other face to face turned into a situation where they were hugging each other equally. The 2 figures hugging each other slowly changed from lying on their sides to lying on their backs. Lance stood in front of the coffin, smiling excitedly. It's successful, Miss Yun, I don't need you anymore. The coffin has been broken. When he spoke, the pair of fangs slowly emerged from the corners of his mouth, and his eyes instantly turned red. Lily's attention quickly turned from the pair of figures to Lance. When she heard when he said this, he subconsciously took a step back. The next moment, Tang Quan was still saying. Why are these two corpses? Before he could finish his words, Lance let out a ferocious roar, rushed towards several people, reached out and grabbed Zhao Hongxian, and before she could react, he pulled her hair, stretched her neck, and with a puff sound, he took a bite. Zhao Hongxian never expected that Lance, who had said he was willing to cooperate with Lily before, and asked him to send her and others away after the matter was completed, and to pay the 500 million reward promised by MRS on his behalf, would suddenly turn against him, and she shouted repeatedly before he even had time to shout. He only felt a sharp pain coming from his neck, and warm blood spurted out, all over Lance's head. When Lily saw something bad, she caught Tang Quan and ran away, but Lance didn't finish sucking Zhao Hongxian's blood. When he heard the footsteps, he stretched out his hand and broke her neck. Poor Zhao Hongxian, who had managed to survive all the way until now, still remained the same in the end. Still can't get out of this tomb of no return safely. Lance, whose face was covered in blood, first grabbed the middle-aged man who was a little slower to react, and after punching his head, he forced himself towards Lily and the two. The cave was not big. As a vampire, Lance was extremely fast. He had just sucked blood, and the wounds on his face that had been struck by lightning began to gradually recover. Miss Yun, you are really capable. I admire you very much. I really don't want to kill you, but you still have to die. If Lily's strength was at its peak and Lance's true identity hadn't been discovered, maybe he would have become friends with Lily as he swore to do, and would not be willing to become her enemy. But now Lance knows that Lily has the ability to hurt him, and with the powerful healing power of vampires, even injuries cannot be repaired. Although Lance wanted to let Lily go at first, after discovering that she had the ability to kill him, in fact, the moment he decided to cooperate, he never thought about letting Lily leave here. The growth of such an enemy is too terrifying, and Lily is only in her 20s from the outside. Given time, if she is injured at this time and does not kill her, one day she will become his nemesis. Lance would not let such a thing happen. When he said this, the sound of Wenkanya's teeth chattering could not help but come from behind. The appearance of the man and woman who were originally separated due to the cracked coffin on the stone bed was revealed. They had been buried here for 700 years. However, the man and woman buried here did not seem to be dead at all. Their bodies were not rotten at all, and their skin did not look like the gray color of dead people. They seemed to have just fallen asleep. As Wenkanya screamed, as the body of the female corpse was exposed in the air, the bare feet began to gradually turn into gray smoke, as if it was slowly disappearing. However, Lance, who had his back to the stone bed, did not notice this. His eyes were full of murderous intent at this time. Tang Quan's eyes twitched. In just a moment, Zhao Hongxian and the middle-aged fat man were both killed by Lance. Among the people who came in this time, only Tang Quan and Lily were left. Tang Quan seemed to have made up his mind. Run, he began to mutter. He wanted to use himself to block Lily's way and save Lily's life just like in the plot. At this moment, he had no time to accuse Lance of being unfaithful. At this critical moment, Tang Quan, knowing this vampire's abilities, he knew that he was no match for him, so he made up his mind to summon the spirit to deal with him. At this moment, Tang Quan could no longer care about anything else. He no longer cared about what he had invited. But before he finished reciting the incantation, Lance was extremely impatient and stopped him in front of him, punching him across the chest. Past. With a bang sound, Tang Quan received the blow, and a large mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth. His body flew up like a kite with a broken string, flying towards the right rear until he hit the wall and then fell to the ground. As he flew, Tang Quan's body brought up a strong wind. The body of the female corpse on the stone platform was blown by the wind and transformed faster. As he landed, the female corpse on the stone bed gradually turned into nothingness. The body lying on the stone platform gradually turned into nothingness. The man who was wearing white clothes and seemed to be sleeping in bed seemed to feel the figure disappearing in his arms. His eyelashes that were originally tightly closed trembled slightly twice and slowly opened them. "Miss Yoon, you are injured, you can't run away, otherwise you would have killed me on the boat." To be continued. Cannon Fodder Strategy. Author, Juan ERWR. Chapter 928. Lance didn't pay attention to the scene behind him at this time. He didn't see the sleeping man suddenly start to move. He just thought that the fruits of victory that he had waited for more than 200 years were about to be picked by him at this moment. Came down, and it also came with such a surprise. "I have been waiting for 200 years, and the wait is indeed worth it. Miss Yoon, your blood is very interesting and contains power that scares me, but I can feel it, it will be good for me, it can fascinate me." After he finished speaking, like a lunatic, he suddenly stretched out his hand and laughed, "Ha ha." There was still blood on his cheek, mouth, and hand after he had just killed Zhao Hongsheng. In this gloomy ancient tomb, the holy fire was shaking. The light reflected on his face made him look particularly ferocious. He swallowed. "Smelling your blood excites me so much. I'm scared and longing at the same time. Miss Yoon, can you understand how I feel?" Lily had expected that this vampire would not be so honest, and it was common for him to fall out at this moment, but she did not expect that entering this ancient tomb was so smooth. The second half of the tomb should obviously be far more brutal than the previous one, but what happened along the way? None of this happened, so that the vampire's strength was not affected at all. A shadow of death hung over her head. Li Yangzi was not in the starry sky. If she died here, she would be truly dead. After living for such a long time and completing so many tasks, she actually sacrificed a lot to survive. She was really unwilling to die like this. Lily took a deep breath, and when Lance opened his mouth to speak, she suppressed her heart beating faster and faster, and closed her hands together on her thighs. She scratched her middle with her thumb. The stone room was already full of blood due to Zhao Hongsheng's death. Lance probably didn't notice such a small move on her part. She began to draw blood spells with her fingers, and Lance got closer and closer to her. She was forced to press her back against the stone room, unable to retreat. The bloody breath that Lance spurted out when he spoke was accompanied by cooling blood foam, which spread all over her face. "I understand how you feel, but do you really think I'm going to just wait to die like this? Ha ha ha, I know Miss Yoon is capable, but you have suffered." Lance suddenly raised his head and laughed, his golden hair creating a halo in the air, and two sharp canine teeth shining brightly in the light. "But you are injured. If you really have the ability to kill me, you would have done it when you were on the boat. Why do you need to talk nonsense to me now?" After Lance finished speaking, he paused. "I'm not stupid, you're not stupid at all." Before the word Yuli could be said, Lily quickly formed the seal with her hands. "Heaven and earth are infinite, the universe is orderly. Stop it, Miss Yoon, your trick. I've noticed it a long time ago." Before Lily could finish reading, Lance reached out and grabbed Lily's seal-forming hand tightly. Purple lightning surged on the sealed seal. At this moment, as the spell stopped, the thunder light flashed twice. Although it burned Lance, the seal was quickly destroyed due to the burnt smell. The thunder light gradually disappeared, and Lily's fingertips were burned. Scratched place. Because Lance pulled hard. Blood gradually poured out, and Lance took a deep breath as if he was intoxicated. "Do you think such a unique smell can be covered up by the blood smell of ordinary people? I smell it." Miss Yoon, after he finished speaking, he grabbed Lily's hand and put it to his mouth. He stretched out his tongue and gently licked Lily's fingertips, then licked the squeezed blood into his mouth. "Would Ha ha ha." That trace of sweetness contained a kind of blood that Lance could not describe. When it entered his mouth, he had already noticed that the magical effect of this blood was much better than he had imagined before. He was so excited that his cheeks were slightly trembling. She started to tremble, grabbed Lily's hand, and dragged her body over with force. At this moment, as Lance said, Lily really has no resistance at all. She entered the mission too late after all. If she was given more time, if she was given more opportunities, she would definitely not. It's a pity that there are not so many people who died here. If so, she came in too late. Although she had tried her best to practice, the magic power in her body was still exhausted. The 5 Thunder Curse that was the only one to activate the magic power in her body just now was originally intended to be activated in the form of a blood curse. To make it more powerful, and must give the foreign devil a fatal blow, but unexpectedly it still failed. The remaining magic power was flowing through his body, the wound on his back was heartbreakingly painful, and the shadow of death hung over his head. Lance pulled her into his arms, holding her in his arms like a close lover. From the corner of his eye, he could vaguely see the 2 sharp teeth glowing with cold light after he opened his mouth. He raised his head high, and those 2 fangs would pierce her neck the next moment. When death was really about to come, Lily calmed down. She had lived for such a long time. Compared with others, she was actually lucky enough. It was a pity that she had escaped so many disasters in the past and had made so many efforts, but in the end she was destroyed. Here. She was imprisoned in Lance's arms, and neither of them noticed that the young man in white clothes who was blinking on the bed had opened his eyes after blinking several times. When those eyes were opened, a pale golden light flashed through them, and then turned dark. When Kanya, who was at the stone table, was very close to the stone bed. When she saw this scene, she opened her mouth wide and trembled all over. After being extremely frightened, she could not open her mouth to say a word. Her body was shaking very violently because, frightened and temporarily silenced, the corpses of Zhao Hongsheng and others were placed on the ground one after another. The surroundings were in a state of utter disarray. She was the most intact and uninjured person in the tomb. She slumped down beside the stone bed and saw the coffin cracked with her own eyes. After opening the door, the 2 people hugging each other walked out. She saw the 2 lifelike corpses, including the appearance of the female corpse, which was 67% similar to hers. She thought about why Lance brought her here, and she thought about the death of her parents, and she felt hatred and regret flooding in her heart like a tide. The appearance of the female corpse was childish, as if she was still very young before she died. Her face was pale, as if she had fallen asleep. When Kanya was not stupid. From what Lance said and when she saw the female corpse in front of her, she had vaguely guessed Lance took her as an opportunity to enter the cemetery and obtain the treasures inside. When Kanya thought that they had the same interests and hobbies, and from now on they lived a happy life together. In the end, she found that it was all in vain. She burst into tears. Because of her willfulness, her parents died in the tomb one after another. They were a happy family of 3 in the past. Now she is the only one left alive, and Lance has killed so many people, there is no way he can let her go. With tears streaming down her face, she was a little horrified to see the female body on the bed disappear. But she couldn't scream. A strange feeling of fear strangled her throat, making her unable to make a sound. Then, she saw the sleeping male corpse on the stone bed and suddenly opened his eyes. Opening her eyes, following Lily's incantation, her eyes showed a bit of mist, and she subconsciously started to recite. Heaven and earth are infinite. The universe is in order, yin and yang have their own way. What's the point? Lance suddenly burst out laughing when he heard this soft voice. His manic laughter, Tang Quan's painful ejaculation as he lay on the ground, and when Kanya's rapid movements echoed in the stone chamber. Lance's head was raised as he was breathing heavily and heart beating, as well as Lily in front of him was chanting a curse that seemed to be unwilling to give up. It stopped immediately. Now that the delicious food was in front of him, he was not as eager as before. He decided to suck Lily's blood first before touching the real meal. He grabbed Lily's hair and forced her head leaning to the right, the slender neck with beads of sweat appeared in front of his eyes. Lily's skin was extremely transparent, and the blood vessels inside were hopping at this time, maybe because of nervousness. Lance swallowed. Death is imminent. Miss Yun, why do you still want to fight to your death? This little trick of yours will hurt me at most, and you want to kill me. But you can't do it, the world is endless. Ha 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 ha. He had the last laugh. His eyes suddenly widened and turned bright red. He lowered his head and was about to bite Lily's neck. Because of his excitement, the veins on his forehead burst out, and his originally elegant and handsome face suddenly became very scary. Horrified, Lily only felt a cold wind blowing on her neck as his face came closer, causing goosebumps to appear on her neck. Her back was pressed against the wall, and a cold feeling spread straight into her body from the injured vest. At this moment, she felt as if her heart was about to stop beating, and her hands and feet began to tremble unconsciously due to nervousness. She cut off her veins and died, not letting herself die in the mouth of a vampire, or accepting her fate. Lily's heart quickly swirled. Now that she couldn't escape, she didn't want this vampire to take advantage easily. Her blood it seemed to be very beneficial to him. If she died before the vampire took his mouth, then he would get nothing, and vampires do not suck blood from dead people. Lily closed her eyes and activated the mana in her body to start flowing in the opposite direction. The next moment, Lance's cold teeth had already touched her skin. Lily was about to speed up the use of mana, but she imagined the sharp pain of being pierced through her neck. It did not come, but the pain after the backflow of mana made her couldn't help but groan. The injuries on her body ached faintly. The spiritual power that had originally flowed back paused for a moment, and then slowly rotated at the correct speed in her body. Stand up. The sky and the earth are infinite, the universe is orderly, the yin and yang have their own way, the law is born from the heart, and it is endless. Follow the way of heaven, transform the two rituals. A soft voice is still thinking. This is not Lily's own voice. She has not heard it before. It seemed that she heard the sound of reciting chapters of the Tiandamen Tao Te Ching, but she was too nervous at that time, and she was thinking about committing suicide rather than taking it easy for Lance. The sound was not loud, so she just thought that she had given birth to something in a trance. It was just an illusion. Now that I actually heard it, I realized that I had not heard it wrong. Lance had heard it wrong before. To be continued. Canon Fodder Strategy. Author, Juan ERWR. Chapter 929. Apart from Lily and Rong Li, it is impossible for anyone else to know about such a magical scripture like the Tao Te Ching of the Heaven and Earth section. She has entered the mission world so many times, and even if she enters the mission world again later, she has encountered another Rong Li. During that mission, some old Taoist priests recognized the Tao Te Ching she practiced, but Lily also learned from their mouths that the Tao Te Ching had been lost long ago. How could anyone in this tomb be able to read it? She wanted to look up, but Lance still held her hair tightly, forcing her head to hang down. Her face looked down, and her scalp was pulled painfully by force, and she couldn't see the movement above. Only to see in the dim light, behind Lance, whose legs were slightly spread, a figure in white clothes had already stood behind him at some point. Generate yin and yang. The voice was still chanting, as if subconsciously acting like a zombie. There was an indescribable feeling in the voice, which seemed to be familiar. Lily seemed to stop for a moment because of Lance's actions. Her beating heart suddenly began to beat violently and crazily. She endured the pain in her scalp and the pain after her neck was stretched, and then followed up with the next sentence. Turn the world around and answer the pardon order. Fellow Taoist, please help me. I don't know where the man in white came from, but before Lily entered the tomb, she didn't find any other living people except her own group. He is most likely the corpse lying in the cemetery, and this is also the purpose of Lance's trip. He knows the Tao Te Ching of Heaven and Earth section. He is most likely the one who laid out this ancient tomb formation for Cao Lan, Emperor Xiao of Wei State, and the master who followed Cao Lan into the tomb and shared the tomb with him. If this person has learned the Tao Te Ching of the Heaven and Earth sect as well as himself, in a certain respect, the two of them can be regarded as belonging to the same sect, although I don't know how this corpse could be resurrected and able to speak again after 700 or 800 years. But at this moment Lily couldn't care about that much anymore. She seemed to have seen a glimmer of hope and shouted, "Fellow Taoist, help!" She didn't see that standing behind Lance. The figure in white had a dazed expression and a bit of confusion in his eyes. After hearing her continue reading, his eyes suddenly burst out with bright light, like two little suns. His original expression was indifferent. Gradually, the hand holding Lance's hair began to stiffen. He pursed his lips tightly, his voice suddenly stopped, and a look of grievance and sadness began to appear in his eyes. A layer of water slowly appeared in his bright black eyes, and he never said the rest of the words. Not going down. He grabbed Lance, who couldn't help breathing, and looked through Lance. He seemed to see the figure trapped in front of him whose face could not be seen clearly. He saw Lance's hand tightly grasping a handful of jet black hair. He flattened his mouth, as if he had been away from home for many years, and the lost lamb finally found his way after thousands of experiences. Xin, the wrong child who found his family. Tears gradually accumulated in his eyes. He grabbed the palm of Lance's hair, and it seemed that he didn't use any force, but the sound of click kept coming when the bones broke, and Lance screamed. But he seemed not to hear it. It wasn't until Lance finally lost control and let go of his hand that he let go of the black hair that he inadvertently slapped Lance with his palm. He quickly knocked it away, revealing that he was trapped in front of Lance. That thin figure. My name is. Without the unsightly presence in the middle, he stared directly at Lily, his delicate brows furrowed and his eyes filled with tears. Lance was knocked away, and the huge pressure on Lily's head disappeared. She finally endured the pain of her neck being forcibly pulled before, raised her head, and when their eyes met, the pale and delicate face came into Lily's eyes, and the handsome white clothes the young man's aggrieved face with a hint of excitement and crying appeared in front of her. Lily's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed to be blinded. When she heard the young man's words, she murmured, "Your name is wrong." Li, the young man in white, who was as handsome as Lanzi, clean and simple, and didn't know the slightest bit about the world, appeared in front of her like a transparent crystal. She didn't know whether Wrong Li really appeared here or she was hallucinating out of desperation. Lily suddenly felt a little want to laugh. A person appeared again and again in her mission. The chance was so pitifully small that she even suspected that she was. It's not that she remembered wrongly. After so many years, she had not seen Wrong Li for a long time. For her, she would deliberately not think of some things again because Wrong Li could not appear here, but she felt he saw Wrong Li. Could it be that she was so desperate that she saw him? Lily couldn't help but raise her lips. She didn't see Li Yangzi before she died, but she saw Wrong Li. Lily felt a little bit dumbfounded for a moment. The sad boy pursed his lips the moment he heard her words. Tighter. My name is Wrong Li, I am Wrong Li. Whether it was the first meeting on the mission, when he said seriously to himself who became Tao Lily that time in the inn, he is Wrong Li, or whether it was meeting him again. In the coffin, she watched him grow and slowly evolve, and she told him his name was Wrong Li. She remembered, whether it was the first encounter or the meeting again after many missions, she remembered the young man named Wrong Li when they met in the inn. He used his fingers to touch her. The word Wrong Li was drawn on the palm of her hand. The corpse poison that entered her body at that time was easy to detoxify, but these two words were firmly engraved in her heart. Lily always thought that she had done too many tasks, and the people and things in the tasks would always be forgotten. She deliberately would not recall the scenes in the tasks, because every time there were people and things in these tasks that she could not forget. In fact, it is just a test of her state of mind. For her, the world in the mission is like a dream. When she wakes up from the dream, she may have other dreams, but the people in the dream are still there. To continue, she would not stop because of the dream, nor would she miss it because of the dream. She thought she had forgotten many people and things, but now she saw the young man in white, who looked like a child who had been away from home for many years. Stood in front of her with a look of grievance, and when her eyes were filled with tears, she began to feel tearing pain in her heart. When the task was long, her heart had long been as hard as steel, but in the tears, Lily felt that something was fermenting in her heart. A sour and painful feeling rose from the bottom of her heart, making her unable to help but bite it tightly. She pressed her lips together and her nose began to feel sour. She never dreamed that the master she would see here would be Rong Li. When she said, "Your name is Rong Li," and he replied, "I am Rong Li," the tears that had been rolling in his eyes began to increase. As his words fell, the transparent and crystal tears were like crystal beads, sliding down his pale and beautiful face. He stared at Lily silently, and when the tears fell to the ground, they made a crisp sound. He did not shout heartbroken, but the sadness between his eyebrows seemed to be real, such silent crying. But it is far more touching than the sad cry. Lily sniffed, raised her injured hand after being grabbed by Lance, and slowly touched his face. The young man stood meekly in front of her, even lowering his head considerately because of her raising her hand. At this moment, Lily forgot about the surrounding scene. She could no longer hear the voice of Lance getting up and roaring. Tang Quan's painful vagina and Wen Kanya's rapid breathing seemed to have become the background at this moment. Lily even forgot after completing his mission, all he could see in his eyes and heart was the figure of the handsome young man in white clothes in front of him. "My name is Rong Li," he said again, his voice was softer than before, as if he was sure, and his eyes were a little persistent and clean. He seemed a little anxious, afraid that Lily wouldn't believe it, but he didn't know what to say. What words could he use to convince her? In desperation, he began to recite the Tao Te Ching again. The beginning of heaven and earth, the beginning of chaos, the marriage of brothers and sisters, and the arrival of human beings. This is the origin chapter of the Tao Te Ching. It was also when Lily became the Jiao Lily who had her neck scratched and was thrown into a coffin to feed the zombies. She loved to follow Lily Jiao. Something he read. Whenever he heard the contents of the Tao Te Ching of the Heaven and Earth sect, he would always calm down. At that time, she was scared and panicked, fearing that one day she would become the zombies' food. She talked to him in fear. Sleeping together, after discovering the usefulness of the Tao Te Ching, she read it to him. She was like a mother with a baby, teaching him babbling and language, teaching him how to recite the Tao Te Ching and how to read, trying hard to teach a zombie to him how to be a human being, so that many years later, when he met himself again with an appearance that was no different from a human being, he was still shouting that he wanted to be a human being, and he was still learning to be a human being. Many past events were flowing in her heart, and Lily suddenly began to feel regretful. How could she forget? How could she forget about Rong Li when she entered the mission for the second time? At this time, she remembered many things that she had deliberately forgotten. She remembered that the cold young man in the inn told her that his name was Rong Li at that time. She had not experienced the subsequent tasks. She did not recognize Rong Li. This young man was a bit stubborn. How should he feel when he told her that his name was Rong Li and asked her to remember it? A dull pain began to tear Lily's heart. As she completed more tasks, her heart became colder and colder. She rarely moved her face for people and things, and rarely shed tears. But at this time she heard Rong Li recited the words of the Tao Te Ching anxiously. He seemed to be in a panic and wanted to prove himself, but he seemed to be too excited, which caused him to stutter when he recited the Tao Te Ching. She thought of the zombie who was a little willful and childlike when they were together in the coffin. When he first started to learn to speak, he stuttered like this, as if he was not very fluent. To be continued. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Cannon Fodder Strategy. Author, Juan ERWR. Chapter 930. Stop making trouble. Lily loved to say this to Rong-Li in the past. Whenever he stretched out his hand to scratch the coffin board and made a squeak sound, she would always scold him like this, asking him to be quiet, and then recite the Tao Te Ching again to calm him down. At this moment, Lily endured the sadness in her heart and scolded. The young man in white who was still reciting the Tao Te Ching stopped his voice again. He was silent for a while, staring at Lily. The next moment, he just opened his hands. Lily threw herself into his arms. "Don't make trouble, don't make trouble," he muttered these two sentences, but the corners of his mouth slowly raised. He guarded her body for thousands of years and tried his best to keep her body from being destroyed. He believed that one day the Japanese can do anything with sincerity, and metal and stone can open up. Just as that hymn said, as long as he gives up something, the girl who told him that his name was Rong-Li will always come back. He used so many methods, and even built a tomb after despair and held her to sleep for more than 700 years. She disappeared, and she finally came back. Lily, Lily, Lily. He kept chanting these two words in his mouth. When he recited these two words, it was much smoother than when he recited the Tao Te Ching of Tiandi sect before, as if he had already recited these two words thousands of times. Every time he read a sentence, Lily agreed. In the end, Rong-Li's voice became softer and softer. Ah! Suddenly, Wen Kanya's sharp scream came, waking up Lily, who was too shocked to see Rong-Li here. She patted Rong-Li's arm, and Rong-Li was holding her. Only then did he let go, but he held her hand in his palm without turning his head. His eyes only reflected Lily's look. "You have blood in your body. You are injured. Who hurt you?" "Although he is a zombie, but I don't know how many years I have lived. It is the nature of zombies to devour blood, but for Rong-Li, he has been able to restrain his blood-devouring instinct thousands of years ago, even if there is a bit of nature in Lily's blood." The temptation towards zombies increased exponentially, but he just frowned. Lily grabbed his hand, tilted her head and crossed Rong-Li's arm to look at the scene behind her. Just after Lance was shot away by Rong-Li, a big hole was made in the stone wall of the back mountain. Just now, Rong-Li accidentally one swing caused great damage to Lance, but the vampire's recovery ability was amazing. So now he was alive and up. However, it was obvious that the blow was quite serious for Lance, so now his face was as white as paper, his originally bright red lips had lost some of their color, and veins popped out on his forehead, like insects in his flesh. The bottom is squirming. After the injury, Lance had not yet fully recovered, and Rong-Li had caused far more damage to him than Lily. He couldn't control himself at this moment, and even two sharp fangs were exposed. His gentle and elegant face suddenly became extremely terrifying. There was blood on his chin and at the corners of his mouth, and he looked like an evil ghost. Wen Kanya couldn't help but scream. The cry echoed back and forth in the stone chamber, even overpowering Tang Quan's painful moans on the ground. Lily glanced at Tang Quan. He was vomiting blood. Lance's blow just now knocked him away, but he was not dead yet. Although it is painful at the moment. But still alive. Lily breathed a sigh of relief. Lance was already carrying Wen Kanya, his green eyes widened, and he rushed towards the side fiercely. He rushed over very fast. In just the blink of an eye, he had already ducked from the side of the stone bed to behind Rong-Li. His closeness even caused Rong-Li's clothes to fly slightly. The next moment he wanted to suck other people's blood just like before. He reached out to pull Rong-Li's hair, tilted his head and wanted to bite his neck. Lily's pupils shrank, and when he was about to form a seal with his hand, Lance's teeth were about to touch the moment before Rong Li's neck. Because of the close distance, Lily could clearly see the look of ecstasy in his eyes, but soon, Rong Li seemed to tilt his head, raised his other arm, and pointed his finger. She casually flicked it on his forehead, and with a bang sound, her fingers flicked between Lance's forehead. Lily seemed to hear the sound of bones breaking. In an instant, Lance's forehead split into big and small pieces. Black blood streaks like spider webs, like cracked granite, quickly covered his entire pale surface. The skin could not withstand such a huge pressure, and blood drops came out bit by bit from the capillary blood pores. However, the vampire's strong recovery power began to gradually repair the moment it was injured. When Lance's body was ejected again, he screamed in pain, and the cracks in the spider pattern seemed to be getting bigger and bigger, but after he fell out, the web-like scars slowly closed again. This process was not pleasant. Lance held Wen Qingye in one hand and wailed. He subconsciously wanted to grab Wen Qingye to suck blood and heal her wounds, but he seemed to have remembered something and didn't say anything. His green eyes turned red at this time, and he let out a painful roar like a beast after being injured. He grinned. Most of the wounds on his face had healed, but Rong Li's forehead was injured in the center. There was a wound about the size of a fingernail, but it was glowing green and could not be closed no matter what. From the corner of his eye, Lance saw Tang Quan lying on the side, unable to move, desperately trying to crawl towards him. Lily saw all this and pulled Rong Li. "We can't let him hurt Tang Quan. I don't know who Tang Quan is." After Rong Li woke up, he almost didn't see anyone else in his eyes. When he heard Lily say this, her behavior was exactly the same as when he first met her many years ago. The two of them were surrounded by Taoist priests at that time. The difference was that he was carrying Lily on his body. At that time, he had developed spiritual wisdom and understood in his heart, but he refused to say it out loud, so Lily was talking about how to deal with it. When someone came, he patted him, pulled him, grabbed his hair and ordered him around. The scene at this time reminded Rong Li of the situation at that time, and a slight smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He nodded seriously, indicating that he understood. He turned around and saw that the alien species had grabbed the dying old man. When he was about to bite him, he grabbed Lily's hand and stepped forward, obviously just stepping out. He took a small step, but the next moment he appeared in front of Tang Quan. Before Lance's mouth touched Tang Quan's neck, Rong Li had already grabbed his hair and forced him to raise his head. Strange, his delicate and beautiful eyebrows frowned, and his expression looked a little confused. He just looked away for a moment, then turned to look at Lily. "The breed has changed, but it is not dead." Lily understood what he meant. Lily knew Rong Li's abilities best. There were distinct levels among zombies. Rong Li had already been the zombie king hundreds of years ago. Logically speaking, even if the zombies evolved, they should still feel his power. Pressure is the key, but Lance dared to bite him, and even beat him to death. At this moment, he actually had the ability to resist. There were clearly different levels of zombies. He was a little curious, how could there be such a bold person as a junior? Let go, Lance was struggling like crazy now. He was caught in Rong Li's palm, and his hand was still holding Tang Quan. He was just like Lily dozens of seconds ago. Caught in his palm, Rong Li seemed to be unable to struggle. He looked like an ordinary, tall, and thin boy. The strength of this grip was not very strong, but he could not escape at all. The severe pain in his forehead and the injured area continued to spread out. The flowing blood made Lance's face look even more ugly. A vampire uses blood as energy, and he can get strength and eternal life from the blood. But once the blood in his body flows out, it means that a large amount of his energy and life are disappearing. In just a few breaths, the skin on Lance's face began to look gray, and the speed of blood flow slowed down his healing. He struggled desperately, but he was like an ant pinched between fingers. Lance had already guessed that the man in the ancient tomb had the strength of the ancestor, but he didn't expect that he was already a marquis in the blood clan, but he had no ability to resist in front of wrong Li. He stretched out his hand gently and flicked himself away. At this moment, the setback to his self-esteem and the fear of death were firmly shrouded in Lance's heart. When he couldn't pull Tang Quan to replenish his energy, he subconsciously pulled Wen Kanya, who was clamped in his hand, into his arms and shouted sternly. Just shout. Let me go, otherwise, she will die. Rong Li's eyes fell on Wen Kanya. Her originally delicate face was now distorted with fear, and tears were now covering her face. She had just fallen out with Lance, her hair was already messy, and her face was in a mess. At this time, her eyes were red and swollen from crying. When she heard Lance's words, she saw Lance's ferocious face at this time. She shook her head and screamed. No, don't kill me, save me, please. Rong Li didn't say anything. Lance originally thought that using Wen Kanya, he could threaten Rong Li into letting him go, but he didn't expect that he had already said everything, but Rong Li didn't seem to understand what he meant at all. Lang soon suddenly became anxious. Spare my life and I will leave, otherwise I will kill her first before you kill me. After he said this, Wen Kanya cried even harder, but Rong Li still didn't respond. Lance, I couldn't help but hold her tighter. She is the girl who looks similar to the girl in your coffin. I have compared it. You Chinese people are very particular about origins. Do you want to watch her die? After he discovered this ancient tomb more than 200 years ago, he has been focusing on how to open the coffin. Until more than 100 years ago, he exhausted all methods and even captured several Chinese Taoist priests. Finally he pushed the coffin lid open a little and saw the two figures hugging each other inside. Except for Rong Li, who was in deep sleep, the female body he held in his arms clearly looked exactly like Wen Kanya. To be continued. Canon Fodder Strategy. Author, Wan Erwr. Chapter 931. Although Lance had seen some scenes in the coffin at that time, he was not strong enough, so the coffin was like an invisible barrier, always blocking his actions. He tried his best to come here several times, he even tried various methods from ancient and modern times, both Chinese and foreign, including blood sacrifice, but it didn't work until he used the money in his hands to find Wen Kanya. For Westerners, they originally had no idea about the appearance of Easterners, but Rong Li's body in the coffin was too attractive to him, so he had long kept the appearance of the female corpse in the coffin in his mind, and when he saw it the moment he took Wen Kanya's photo, he felt that this Oriental girl was 67% similar to the female corpse in the coffin. Although they were not exactly the same, the moment he saw Wen Kanya, Lance still felt that the opportunity has come. He firmly believed in the so-called reincarnation theory in China. When he saw Wen Kanya, he thought of using Wen Kanya to enter the ancient tomb. He always felt that once Wen Kanya was introduced into the stone tomb, she and the female corpse in the coffin would be together. With a similar appearance, maybe he could open the coffin that he had been unable to get close to. To this day, he has been disappointed many times. When he got a rare opportunity, Lance was not willing to let it go at all. Therefore, he entered Wen Kanya's college and used the handsome appearance of the vampires and the accumulation of his life for many years. The knowledge he learned, coupled with the vampire's attractive charm, quickly made him obsessed with him, and Wen Kanya agreed to follow him to the ancient tomb. Everything went very smoothly. He met Lily and his party, and the coffin lid that had been unable to be opened for more than 200 years was finally opened. He was ecstatic, thinking that his goal was about to be achieved, but Lance did not expect that the sleeping ancestor would wake up, and he had never eaten for many years. In a weak state, he still possesses such terrifying abilities. Lance didn't know at all that Rong Li did not rely on blood to survive, and the source of his power was not fresh blood. Instead, he mainly focused on the resentment and spiritual energy of this place. During the years he was sleeping, in fact, every moment he was nourished by the spiritual energy felt like he was practicing. At this time, Lance began to doubt whether Wenkanya existed. Even though he opened the coffin, he brought Rong Li back to life. For a moment, his expression was mixed with yin and yang, and his eyes showed a look of despair and regret. The female corpse in the coffin is not a vampire. You are of a different species from her, but you put a lot of thought into her. Do you love her? Since you care about her, and now she has disappeared, I will give you her reincarnation, and you let me go. For the vampires, humans are just their food. No matter how well Lance disguises himself on the outside, he actually despises these humans. He is polite to Wenkanya just because of his own inherent pride and etiquette, not because he respects and cares for Wenkanya. But Rong Li was different. For the sake of this female corpse, he was willing to sleep together with her after her death. It was conceivable that he was truly emotionally moved. Lance thought about this. Hope slowly appeared in his eyes again. How? Rong Li glanced at Lily in confusion, and then at Wenkanya, who was pointed nervously by Lance. The frightened and distorted woman's face did seem familiar, and he frowned. Trying to remember, he understood every word of Lance's words. But she didn't seem to understand what every word meant. Seeing his serious expression, Lily seemed to see the simple zombie who asked her seriously for advice on how to be a human being many years ago, and her eyes gradually softened. When the coffin was opened, Lily sensed something was wrong. Her first thought was to run away. Then she was chased by Lance. She didn't notice the movement on the stone bed. She only vaguely saw the two people hugging each other above. At this moment, after listening to what Lance said, he realized that it was Rong Li holding a female corpse, and that the female corpse looked somewhat similar to Wenkanya. Lance obviously thought that Wenkanya was the female corpse. He means that the sleeping person you are holding in the coffin is Wenkanya. He is holding. Lily pointed at Wenkanya and said something. As soon as she finished speaking, Lance lit up with all his strength. First of all, Monk Wenkanyazang was scratching his head. Just hearing Lily's words, her rapidly beating heart first stopped for a moment, and then started beating crazily again. Indeed, she thought of the corpse that disappeared inexplicably just now, and it looked somewhat similar to her own. She didn't think so much at that time. She just vaguely guessed that Lance had brought her here with ill intentions. In addition, the disappearance of the female corpse was too strange, so she was frightened. At this time, she heard something about reincarnation. Wenkanya was caught in Lance's arms. Seeing how Lance was so afraid of Rong Li, her eyes as soon as the light came on, she subconsciously raised her head and glanced at Rong Li. She saw Rong Li's delicate face, and then thought of the 700 years he had been sleeping holding his self in the previous life. Somehow, Wenkanya's eyes began to feel a little warm, and she murmured, "Save me." She didn't know what Rong Li's name was. When Lily and Rong Li spoke before, she was so frightened, and Lance restrained him, that she didn't hear the two of them at all. What? Now she was staring at Rong Li pitifully. Lance breathed a sigh of relief and smiled on his face. He was waiting for Rong Li to let him go, but he didn't expect Rong Li to understand what Lily said. After saying these words, his face suddenly turned cold. She is not. The one I'm holding is obviously you. Rong Li's eyes showed anger at this moment. He was as transparent as crystal. He was happy, unhappy, angry, and sad. All kinds of expressions were displayed on his delicate face and in his clear black and white eyes. He felt offended by what Lance said at this moment. He was not angry when his home was destroyed. Lance was making a fool of himself in his territory. In the human world, it is important to respect the old and love the young. Rong Li is in the human world. After living in the world for many years, he has accepted this point of view. He can treat Lance as a junior and ignorant, but now Lance unexpectedly wronged him, which made wrong Lee a little unbearable. The two fangs in his mouth, which had not appeared for many years, were now slightly protruding from the corners of his mouth. It was obvious that he was indeed angry. The one I'm holding is obviously Lily, how could it be someone else? A wave of coercion made Lance unable to breathe. A look of horror appeared on Lance's face, and he tried his best to shrink his tall body. He didn't understand which of his words actually made the ancestor angry. He licked his pale and chapped lips helplessly. The large amount of blood loss made him look extremely weak now, and it seemed as if his previously shrewd head could not turn around. How is it possible? How could it be Miss Yoon? At this moment, Lance felt a bit dumbfounded. He subconsciously retorted, Yoon, Miss Yoon and the woman in the coffin look nothing alike. He was too surprised. So much so that he almost forgot about being afraid. When Rong Li heard what he said, he raised one of his beautiful eyebrows. He stared at Lance with a confused and helpless look. You are not a human being. No matter how similar you are in appearance, I think you should be a kind of zombie. Habits can be assimilated, and your nature has also been assimilated. Rong Li's words made Lance's already terrifying face slightly distorted, as if Rong Li said he was a human, which was a great insult to him. His nose even began to tremble slightly, and his flat chest also he began to heave uncontrollably, and his eyes became bright red, but he did not dare to act rashly because of his instinctive fear of the superior. When did zombies start recognizing people by only looking at skin, flesh, and bones? That's just appearance. When he looked at Lily, he never looked at appearance. Otherwise, in the process of thousands of years, he would have to find someone who was the same as her before. It's not a difficult thing to have a similar appearance, and he doesn't have to wait for so many years, guarding the body, hoping that she can come back one day. In comparison, it is really difficult to identify the person who appears with thousands of different faces at different times and places among thousands of people. I want to thank you for bringing her back, so I can tolerate you destroying my shelter. Rong Li's eyelids drooped, and his fine and long eyelashes blocked his sight. This coffin was very important to him. It was of extraordinary significance. It was something that stayed with him until the end, as long as he could remember it. He had owned many things that did not belong to him. When he was in the human world, he also learned that ordinary people worked for 5 buckets of rice, but he learned no matter how similar it looks, he can't use it for the food of mortals. Those gold, silver, and jewels for which human beings have sacrificed their lives are just passing clouds to him. He has obtained them, but in the end they are still not in his hands. He had been waiting for the person who didn't belong to him. This place had been shared by another girl. From the first moment he saw it, when he first opened his mind, the only thing that truly belonged to him was this one from beginning to end. The coffin that accompanied him showed a hint of regret on Rong Li's pale and delicate face. He looked at the fragments that fell to the ground, loosened his grip on Lance's hair, and stretched out his hand. Several pieces of the coffin that had originally fallen on the ground slowly flew towards his hand as if they were attracted by something. It's a pity, but it will just break into pieces. He grabbed the coffin, rubbed it twice with his slender fingers, threw it back on the stone bed, and turned his head. My spiritual hub has been destroyed, so I can treat you as young and ignorant. When Rong Li said this in an old-fashioned tone with a serious look on his beautiful and clean face, Lily couldn't help laughing at the side, but at this moment, Lance couldn't laugh. He felt something was wrong, so he squeezed his body tighter. He hugged Wen Kanya tightly to his chest, as if she was a talisman. When Rong Li said that he didn't recognize people by their appearance, Lance knew that he had made a huge mistake. He brought the real Lily here by mistake. At this time, Lance felt overwhelming regret. Come. To be continued.